Looking through this list of 21 regions, any guesses as to what's performed the best over the last 10 years by change in median growth rate? It was none other than Kwinana. Mandurah has had a huge comeback over the last 5 years. It's done an impressive 68.3% increase over the last 10 years, but it did go down the toilet massively. You'd have to wonder when we were going to get a Western Suburbs top performing region in. It's done 65.7% growth over the last 10 years. And that's really interesting because those regions, those suburbs within there are going to have a really strong kick as we round out our cycle.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management, sales and buyers agency servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here's your host, Jared Mann.
G'day and welcome to another episode of Perth Property Insider. Today I'm taking a deep dive into the regions of Perth that have underperformed over the long term. I'm talking 10 and 20 years, where has outperformed over those same time periods, and where might be undervalued relative to their long-term performance. Keep in mind, this is not how we go about selecting our suburbs using our trifecta method, but I think it's definitely worth understanding and having these insights for the larger picture of where performance has been, some of the reasons why, and where underperformance has been and some of the reasons why. And if you can also stack an undervalued suburb that comes out of these insights on top of where we might otherwise be looking to buy for our trifecta method, again, I think it's a bit of an X factor that gives another potential reason for an area to outperform over the short, medium, and longer term. If it hasn't done quite as well recently, but the history of it doing well's there. So now let's start by talking submarkets. And interestingly enough, Perth is grouped into 21 submarkets. We're talking from the very far north to the very far south down in Mandurah. So I should know what the furthest north region is here. It's not gonna probably be Wanneroo. I'm just looking through the list. Escapes me at the moment, but I'm sure someone will comment and correct me. But looking through this list of 21 regions, any guesses as to what's performed the best over the last 10 years by change in median growth rate? It was none other than Kwinana. So that's pretty staggering. There's been a lot of transformation that's gone on in there. It's definitely shining brightest by the stage of the cycle that we're at as well. I don't think it'd necessarily hold its top spot by the end of our cycle, but the lower end has grown by the most at the moment. And keep in mind that things are rippling through to the middle and then the top if everything goes according to plan. So Kwinana has done an impressive 75.7% growth over the last 10 years. And what's more impressive is when we consider and look back even further, over 20 years, no other submarket has also performed as strongly. So it's performed the strongest over both a 10-year period and a 20-year period, and it's done an impressive 293.9% over 20 years. So if you own a property down there, with my recent episodes looking at the impact of AUKUS and all the jobs and things that are going into Henderson, I think it might certainly often have had a bad rep, Kwinana, and at times you might have been struggling to attract good tenants in there. But the suburbs within that submarket have definitely been changing. There's been gentrification, there's been newer housing, pockets go into there. It has transformed the area a lot. You'd have to keep in mind that some of this median price uplift may also be because of those newer homes getting built and overinflating what some of the price increase may have been. But I know anecdotally from seeing what individual prices have gone to on individual properties that it'd have to be towards the very top of the list. When we then go down to look at which submarket is in spot 2 on our top 5 list of top performing suburbs over the longer term, we're talking 10 years initially that we're focusing on. Mandurah has had a huge comeback over the last 5 years, which is what has put it in this list. And it's done an impressive 68.3% increase over the last 10 years. But it did go down the toilet massively. So the 10-year growth, so when we look to 20 years, it's only actually done 163%, nearly half of what the Kwinana submarket has done, because it went so far down the toilet that the majority of its growth comeback in the last 5 years has done 91.7. 10 years has done 68.3, which still put it up there. But you can see that it's had to have a big resurgence in the last 5 years to come back from what happened in the previous 5 years to that. And still over the long 20 years, it's underperformed. And that volatility really came about, I think, for a number of reasons. And I don't know if it's going to continue to be as volatile. What happened is a lot of people started. Mandurah was originally seen as the retirement sort of hotspot, still is to a certain extent, but I think it's diversified a lot more now. It's got a lot of first home buyers. It's pretty much become another suburb of Perth as Perth has grown to encompass it. The metro spans, all the way down there now. And I think it got caught out by having a lot of extra land supply when we went into 2015, 2016 onwards. A lot of the people with canal lots, other things, the prices went down the absolute toilet. In many cases, they halved. But what subsequently happened now is demand's caught up with supply. People have built on a lot of those lots. The land supply is a lot tighter. There's very little in there now. People's money sort of caught up with their plans as well. A lot of people sort of bought land ahead of time to almost land bank for that future when they finally got to retire. They had sort of timeframes of 10 plus years or 5 to 10 years. I think a lot of people that got caught out in the GFC would have retired earlier and had to work harder for longer. So they should have been retiring into that sort of 2015 period, but they didn't, and they've had to work longer, harder, and now they're finally, the majority have built on those. Land supply's caught up, demand's exceeded, and I don't think we're going to ride the roller coaster like we have there. So it could be a much brighter next 10 years, but I don't think we're going to see the kind of catch-up crazy growth that we've had to put it second on the list. But certainly interesting to see how it's got there. Now, number 3 on our submarkets list is Cottesloe and Claremont. You'd have to wonder when we were going to get a Western Suburbs top performing region in, and this is it. It's done 65.7% growth over the last 10 years. And that's really interesting because those regions, those suburbs within there are going to have a really strong kick as we round out our cycle. And I think truest measure will be in another 2 or 3 years when we look at where this list sits, because as I mentioned earlier, the bottom end's had the majority of the growth so far. So this just goes to show that quality really has still performed exceptionally well over the last 10 years. And when I look at over the last 5 years, it's done very well as well. And then when we look over the last 20 years, it's really done exceptionally too. So 20 years, it's done 223%. 5 years, it's done 66%. So it didn't do too much in the previous 5 years. It would have sat relatively flat, but a very consistent performer over the longer term. That just shows that quality holds up. Now, number 4 on our list, which has also been featured in recent episodes to do with the AUKUS project and its potential impact, is Rockingham. And you'd have to think with everything that's going to go on down there that it's going to be a very fairly certain bet to be holding its own in the top 5 in the coming decade as well. It has done 64% growth over the last 10 years. Over 20 years, it's done a very respectable 191%. So it hasn't crazily outperformed over 20 years, but certainly done very well over the last 10 years. And the majority of that has been in the last 5 years, which has done crazy levels, 94% over the last 5 years. That's third only to Kwinana that had done more in the last 5 years, and Gosnells, which had done more, Gosnells submarket, which had done more in the last 5 years. So interesting to see that that's in the top 5, and easy to understand when we unpack just how much investor activity's gone into there, and a lot of migrants. And really the south coast was and still is very undervalued compared to the north coast when we look at the north and south of Perth. Now, finally, to round out our top 5 was Melville, and think the kind of suburbs like that are just south of the river, and they've got some great schools in there. We've got the Rossmoyne school zone. We've got a lot of other really great riverside suburbs. So we've got Applecross in there. We've got Bateman. We've got Mount Pleasant. We've got Winthrop. So interestingly, I thought Rossmoyne was in there, but that actually falls within City of Canning. So that one's not in there. Now, when we look at that area, it's been a very decent performer as well, with 63% growth over the last 10 years. 232% over the last 20 years, so one of the highest over the last 20 years. And you'd really, I guess, put that down to the quality of the schools in there and the overall, amenities close to Perth still. Obviously, very popular with families, and a good sort of more consistent performer. So nothing unlike some of the other submarkets that have done really crazy in certain periods. It's been a lot more consistent throughout. Now, other areas to round out the top 10 were Fremantle, South Perth. Armidale got in there because of its crazy bottom end kick up, almost fueled from investors. We got Joondalup, and we had Perth City as a region in there too. I'm not going to spend too much time on those next 5 in the top 10, but what I did want to focus on was the bottom performers, because this is where I think represents some really good opportunity. The worst submarket for 10-year growth in median house price was actually Belmont Victoria Park, would you believe? With just a 40% change over the last 10 years. Still had done very well over the 20-year period with 201%. So it really just shows to me how relatively undervalued this area is. We then also had City of Stirling, which has done 41%. Not quite as good over the 20 years, but still respectable at 183.9. We've got Canning, I think Cannington, East Cannington, Queen's Park type area. Done very well in the 20-year growth rates, 208%, but very low in the 10-year, 42%. And the final one to round out the bottom 4 was Bayswater Bassendean. And this is another area that I believe is really undervalued as well, and it came up in my gentrifying suburbs, top 5 gentrifying suburbs list from a few episodes back as well. Interestingly enough, we had Carlisle Lathlane come up in there, which I think should fall within Belmont as well. We'll just see. Yes, Lathlane and Carlisle do fall within there. So that sounds to me like a bit of a perfect storm, that those bottom 4, especially for me, Bayswater, Bassendean and Belmont Victoria Park submarkets, have really underperformed compared to their long-term 20-year average. And when we consider there's a huge amount of gentrification happening in 2 of those suburbs being in the top 5 in Perth, you'd have to see that those are really going to change over the next decade and will catch back up. I would probably bet one of my houses on it. So that's a good analysis for you of the submarkets and where growth has outperformed, where things have underperformed, and some of the reasons why.
Just real quick before we continue on with the episode, are you getting my email updates yet? If you're not, you're missing out on our suburb intelligence reports, which we tailor and prepare for your individual suburbs of interest, showing advanced stats and insights. Must get onto those. And I also send out exclusive invitations to our events, including webinars, sundowners, and workshops. So if you're not getting those, head on over to investorsedge.com.au/join and make sure you're receiving my email updates.
I want to now look at the top 5 suburbs for growth over the 10 years. I'll round out the top 10 just to see what the overall sort of flavour is to them and if there's any common themes. And then again, I'm going to touch on the bottom performers, see whether their position there is justified, see what some of the reasons might be, and see whether they might be undervalued and represent a good opportunity for you to look deeper at them for the coming decade. So, top 5 suburbs. The top suburb, any guesses? Do you think it's a lower end suburb? Do you think it's a middle? Do you think it's a top higher price suburb? It's actually Trig with a median house price of 2.3 million. Its 10-year growth has been 115%. Now that's just must be purely based on the quality of that seaside suburb and how popular it's been. 115% change over 10 years. Over 20 years, it's done a massive 290% change. So keep in mind that's more than any single other suburb across the whole of Perth. I'm talking in 10-year total growth, more than Kwinana, more than Armidale areas. This is the top suburb, 115%. Very impressive indeed. So quality definitely trumps there, and you'd have to think by the end of this cycle, it's probably still going to be up there because the upper end has still got more to go and more to round out in the cycle. We next had Bouvard, which definitely ties into the story I was telling you earlier about Mandurah going down the toilet and then having a big comeback, because the 10-year growth rate is massive at 114%, but the 20-year was only 135%. So the previous 10 years had only done 15% over a 10-year period. It was diabolically bad. So certainly had some catch-up growth. Probably won't ride the same roller coaster, but that was the suburb that most contributed to Mandurah being in the top 5 submarkets. Then when we look to other individual suburbs that were in this top 5, we had Jolimont, another high-end area with 1.9 mil median price, had done 105% growth. We had Applecross with 2.78 mil median and Shenton Park with 2.2. The quality has really still held up over this 10-year period. As I mentioned, I think there's a lot more to be had here still too. So just goes to show that I know a lot of the hype and a lot of the attention, especially in the short term and over this 5-year period, has been towards the bottom end suburbs. There's been all kinds of stuff in very well-known investors, other podcast hosts talking about, hey, you don't have to, you can still get long-term great growth in low-end areas. I beg to differ that quality over the long term still trumps. And yes, if you can't afford to buy quality for the long term, you can still do well with suburb selection and choosing best suburb that you can afford and the best suburb within that. And selection does play certainly a very important role, but this definitely motivates me to try to get into more quality, higher end price points, just because of when I see how impressive these growth figures are, and we haven't even rounded out our cycle. Now, other suburbs to round out the top 10. Are they all high-priced suburbs? No, they're not. We've got Marmion with 1.8. That's a high-priced suburb. But then we've got Hillman, which is a suburb of Rockingham. That's got a 615K median. That's really been a big part of Rockingham's submarket growth, pushing that up. We had Medina, which was one of the Kwinana suburbs, in there at spot 8. We then had Darlington, which is a hill suburb, often overlooked, but has done very well over the 10-year period. And we've then got Camillo, which was in the city of Armidale and had a crazy level of growth over the 10-year period. Still has done very well over the 20-year period. Arguably changed a lot, transformed a lot, but also probably had a lot of its growth that it's going to be a bit more subdued now. So let's now go down the list, down, and we're going to go to the worst performing suburbs and see what they've got in common. Are any of them due for a comeback? So when we look at the top 10, the very worst performing suburb over a 10-year period of looking at median sale price changes was Vivash. It's a often overlooked, unknown suburb that's out next to Midland. Any one time, it can be hard to sell there, especially in the down market, because people often don't search. It's only had 13.7% growth over a 10-year period. And over 20 years, it hasn't done very well at all either, 133.9% growth. I think it'll have some comeback, but I wouldn't necessarily be betting on it for the long term either. Next area was East Perth, and it's just never really broken out. And it's crazy because of how close to Perth it is, how great the amenities are with the cove in there, the cafes, all the rest of it. Look, it might have some decent catch-up growth in the shorter term. It's done just 19% growth in the last 10 years. But over the 20-year period, it's done even less than Vivash. It's done 129.7%. So due for some catch-up, but compared to the long-term growth, it's not substantiating to me for it to have a really strong comeback over the medium to long term. So probably not the one to invest in either for the medium or long term, maybe for the short term, but I'd prefer not be. That's more speculation and should never invest with those timeframes in mind as far as I'm concerned. Now, then we've got some real opportunities here. We've got Jundana. There is absolutely no way that should be on the third lowest over a 10-year period with just 21.7% growth. Why? It's such a quality location still. It's the median house price is $992,000. That seems so cheap for a house compared to some of the other areas. It was in City of Stirling that had relatively underperformed in the submarkets that I discussed earlier. Over 20 years, it has performed very well still with 210% growth. So that for me is a real outlier that it should come back strongly. We've then got a few other suburbs here that are the next on the list is Hazelmere. So that's got an 843K median house price. It's in the city of Swan. It's relatively underperformed with just 21.8%. And over the 20-year period, it's done 237%. So it should have some catch-up growth. Arguably, it's fairly high price for what it is, though. I don't know if I wouldn't be necessarily choosing that over a Jundana, which location to Perth-wise is just so handy and so good, and it's got such good amenities, whereas Hazelmere is still relatively far out, City of Swan way. Next area was Ascot. So that was the fifth worst. It had done pretty well over the 20-year period. But I don't know, a bit of the story of Ascot, it's kind of never lived up to that initial potential that saw it surge. And it could have been like a river inland Hillary's or something. Or what they could have done with it amenity-wise could have been so much better than what it is. It has improved a lot in the last 5 years. I think it's got some shorter-term gains to be had just because of how close to Perth it is and how much it's underperformed with just 24.3% over the last 10 years. I'm still on the fence about whether it's justified for the medium to long term just based on these stats. I'm not talking a trifecta method or anything else that we use to analyze areas. I'm just purely looking at underperformance over these periods, okay? So then we get to, that's our top 5 worst. We then got a few other suburbs here that I'd stay away from. At number 6 and 7, we've got Carrawarra and we've got Hilbert, which is part of Armidale. Both have had relatively low 10-year and 20-year performances, so I wouldn't necessarily think that either of them are undervalued. They might do some catch up in the short term, but medium to longer term, I wouldn't bet on them. We've got O'Connor, though, which is in Fremantle Way. That's done 28% over the last 10 years, but has still done a very respectable over 20 years, done 199%. So that's, to me, seems like a relatively undervalued bet. I mean, you look at the median house price there, 755, seems very low for what it is and could be a good opportunity to get in there. And then the final 2 rounding out the bottom 10, was Bentley and Cannington, and they came up in my submarkets that were undervalued. Belmont was not at number 12, just out of interest. So Bentley and Cannington, they've both done around 29% growth over the last 10 years. They've both performed not outstandingly well over 20 years. So that was over the last 10 years. Over 20 years, they've both done 172 and 174%. So they haven't set the world on fire, but they still seem very undervalued compared to what they've done over 20 years. So I think some good opportunity there, especially if you don't have a big budget. Median house prices there are 618 and for Cannington and 710 for Bentley. So you look at those prices, I mean, compared to what people are spending for stuff in Armidale and Gosnells, they seem way undervalued. So lots of interesting stuff from this analysis. I hope you've gotten a lot out of it. We've looked at our submarkets that have outperformed, those that have underperformed, where value represented. We've looked at our suburbs that have outperformed and those that have underperformed and where the individual suburb opportunities might lie. Hopefully that can inform your investing. And if you've enjoyed this episode, like and share it with friends. Feel free to post a comment on YouTube. I love seeing what you thought. And post a review on iTunes if you get a moment. I really appreciate that. And if we can help you buy a property that is likely to outperform, get in touch. We've got our buyer's agency side that's still making some really great purchases in a very competitive market. You need to be a lot more selective. Our research methodologies are well and truly paying for themselves many times over, and we're still making purchases typically within a month, but almost all of them within 2 months. Focusing here in Perth for a 1 to 2 year time frame still, and buying for some clients across in Melbourne for a 2 to 3 year time frame. So get in touch if we can help on the buying side. And of course, we have our full service offering for property management and sales as well. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Just a reminder, the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. As we don't know your specific situation, you should always seek professional advice before taking any action. For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my property investor update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. I'll see you in the group.